All right. We are on the other side of the transcendental deduction. Still confused about it, but kind of okay with it. As okay as I'm going to be right now. I think it's probably, frankly, what I've been kicking around is the idea of reading through, like just pushing through the book as much as possible, and then maybe rereading portions of it and revisiting portions of it that I want to after I finish it. Because I don't. This is as far as I've made it. It's been like 4 tries. The first time I made it all the way through the transcendental deduction. I don't want to, especially because my understanding is like this next section discusses the categories a lot, and I don't want to go revisit the transcendental deduction with an eye towards understanding the category aspect of it a little more, which I know is like an absolutely massive part of it. But I think it would probably be better to get a better understanding of the categories maybe in later parts of the book, and then maybe revisit some stuff later. Because frankly, I feel pretty good about the intro, preface, transcendental aesthetic. And I mean, that's like the first 70 pages or so. I feel pretty good about the table of logic, and then the table of the logical functions, is it? Whatever. And then we get to the categories, which are the a priori concepts we bring to experience. And I get a little fuzzy as to how that comes together. But anyway, my understanding for the upcoming book, The Analytic of Principles, it's book 2 of the Transcendental Analytic. I watched Victor Gijsbers' video a couple of times. And effectively, my understanding is the way that he put it is like, imagine that you have so we experience space and time as we discussed in a transcendental aesthetic, and the categories apply to us. But imagine somebody who doesn't experience space and time the same way, or has intuitions and experience in a different way. The same categories may apply, right? Or will apply. I think Kant would take that position. And so, if that's true, it kind of seems like the experience aspect is not really tethered to the categories. It seems kind of arbitrary, or what was the word? Non-homogeneous, I believe. And so in the Analytic of Principles, I think we're going to get a better understanding of the categories and kind of like talk about them in much more detail. And Kant is going to come up with what's he called? The transcendental, I don't know. Fusion, no. I don't remember what it's called. Schematism. Something like that. And like the schematism is some sort of murky afterbirth that connects the transcendental aesthetic to the actual categories. But anyway, enough of me talking. I'm going to start reading. All right, Transcendental Analytic, Book 2, Analytic of Principles. General logic, e.g. as in the table of logic that we talked about. General logic is constructed on a plan that coincides accurately with the division of the higher faculties of knowledge. These are understanding, power of judgment, and reason. Logic, therefore, treats in its analytic of concepts, judgments, and inferences. Logic, therefore, treats in its analytic of concepts, judgments, and inferences corresponding with the functions and order of the above-named mental powers, which are comprehended under the broad name of understanding in general. So we have concepts, judgments, and inferences. My understanding is concepts are like the basic building blocks, like dog, judgments, something like that dog is stupid, And inferences, I think, would just be like bigger things, like linking judgments together and kind of putting them together to make a point, a larger point. As this merely formal logic abstracts from the contents of our knowledge, pure or empirical, but treats only the form of thought of discursive knowledge in general, it may well, in its analytical part, also contain the canon of reason. For reason has, with respect to its form, definite rules which, without reference to the particular nature of the knowledge to which they are applied, can be found out a priori by a mere analysis of the acts of reason into their component parts. Okay, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, meaning logic has kind of basic rules separate and apart from our experience, and in these things, concepts, judgments, inferences, kind of make sense that they would contain a canon of reason, is what he says, which I think would just be abide by general principles of logic as kind of a matter of rule. Matter of rule. What a smart guy. Okay. Transcendental logic being limited to a certain content, namely the content of pure a priori knowledge, cannot follow general logic in this division. For it is clear that the transcendental use of reason cannot be objectively valid, and so cannot belong to the logic of truth, that is, to the analytic. It must, rather, as a logic of illusion, be allowed to form a separate part of our scholastic system under the name of transcendental dialectic. Okay, when Kant is saying transcendental logic here, I think what he's talking about is like logical, like metaphysical rules that aren't necessarily tethered to like reality. And he talked about this in the, I think, introduction and or preface, because he refers to the transcendental dialectic as using logic in a way that logic can't be used, like extending it further, like using it for transcendent purposes, like to give us a logic of heaven or God or something like that. Whereas like that's what he refers to here as like a logic of illusion. Like we don't necessarily have a concept in the real world to pin that to, or anything empirical to pin it to, and we also can't use kind of a priori reasoning to attach rules to it. So I think that's what he's kind of talking about here. Understanding and power of judgment have, therefore, in transcendental logic, their canon of objectively valid and hence true use, and so belong to its analytic part. But reason, in its attempts to determine something a priori with regard to objects, and to expand knowledge beyond the limits of possible experience, is altogether dialectical, and its illusory assertions have no place in a canon such as analytic demands. Analytic of principles, therefore, will be canon solely for the power of judgment, teaching it how to apply to appearances the concepts of the understanding, which contain the condition of a priori rules. Sorry, I'm going to read that again. The analytic of principles, put some stars next to this. The analytic of principles, therefore, will be a canon solely for the power of judgment, teaching it how to apply to appearances concepts of the understanding, which contain the condition of a priori rules. For this reason, and in order to indicate my purpose more clearly, I shall use the name the doctrine of the power of judgment, Pretty cool. While treating what really are the principles of the understanding. Introduction of the transcendental power of judgment in general. If understanding in general is explained as the faculty of rules, the power of judgment will be the faculty of subsuming under rules. That is, of distinguishing whether something falls under a given rule. Okay, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, so you have the understanding, which is a faculty of rules. It's putting rules on things in experience and allowing us to synthesize them and become concepts. And then judgment is kind of determining whether or not certain things fall under those given rules or not. General logic contains no precepts for the power of judgment and cannot contain them, for it abstracts from all the contents of our knowledge. It only has to explain analytically the mere form of knowledge as expressed in concepts, judgments, and inferences. The form of knowledge. Okay. And thus to establish formal rules for all use of the understanding. If general logic were to attempt to show in general how anything should be subsumed under these rules, that is, how we should distinguish whether something falls under them or not, then this could only take place by means of another rule. If logic were to attempt to show in general how anything should be subsumed under these rules, that is, how we should distinguish whether something falls under them or not, then this could only take place by means of another rule. That makes sense. This rule, because it is a general rule, requires a new instruction from the power of judgment. And we thus learn that whereas the understanding is capable of being instructed by and equipped with rules, the power of judgment is a special talent which cannot be taught but can only be practiced. And like my understanding of what he's talking about here is kind of judgment is like an act of discretion. So I mean, categorizing things is, technically a judgment, and it's kind of binary, and therefore not discretionary isn't necessarily the right word, but it is, I think the example that Professor Gijsbers used was like determining whether something is a dog. Excuse me. So like, if you're constantly saying, "Oh, I think that's a dog," and it's not, you need to like practice, performing judgment better. And then like a more sophisticated example of that would be, judging somebody like a judge, in a court of law, whether or not to find somebody guilty, whether or not something, whatever, is factually accurate or, whatever. Takes practice. You can't just kind of tell somebody how to judge something. This is why power of judgment is the specific mark of our so-called native wit, the absence of which cannot be remedied by any schooling. For although the teacher may offer to, and as it were, graft into, a narrow understanding plenty of rules borrowed from the insight of others, the faculty of using them rightly must belong to the pupil himself. And without that talent, no rule may be prescribed to him for this purpose is safe from abuse. Hence, a physician, a judge, or a politician may carry in his head many beautiful, pathological, juridical, or political rules, even to the degree that he may become an accurate teacher of them, and he may yet, in the application of these rules, commit many a blunder. For either he is deficient in the natural power of judgment, though not in understanding, and may know the universal in abstracto, but yet be unable to distinguish whether a case in concreto falls under it. Right, so like for example, like you can know all the laws, but whether or not a specific situation constitutes a violation of a law, you're not necessarily going to know that unless you have practice in actually judging something. That may not sound accurate. That as an attorney, I can assure you that's a skill, not just a binary like, oh yeah, you did this, you broke a rule. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's like, what the hell happened here? Is that a violation? I don't know. What? Anyway, it is the one great advantage of examples that they sharpen the power of judgment. Examples sharpen the power of judgment. Yeah. But they are apt to impair the correctness and precision of the insight of the understanding, because they only rarely fulfill the conditions of the rule quite adequately. Furthermore, they often weaken the effort of the understanding to comprehend rules, according to their adequacy, in a universal way and independently of the particular circumstances of experience, and hence accustom us to use those rules in the end more as formulas than as principles. Examples may thus be called the leading strings of the power of judgment, which those who are lacking in the natural talent can never do without. All right, I think I understood a whole paragraph, and it went fairly quickly. But although general logic can give no precepts to the power of judgment, the case of transcendental logic is quite different. Is a quite different matter. Although general logic can give no precepts to the power of judgment, the case of transcendental logic is a quite different matter. Indeed, it seems to be the proper business of the latter to correct and to secure by means of determinate rules the power of judgment in the use of the pure understanding. For as a doctrine, that is, as a means of expanding the understanding in the field of pure a priori knowledge, philosophy does not seem necessary, but rather inappropriate, because, in spite of all attempts that have hitherto been made, hardly an inch of ground has been gained by it. As critique, however, in order to guard the power of judgment against mistakes, lapis judicii, in its use of the few pure concepts of the understanding that we possess, philosophy, though its benefits are then only negative, is called upon with all the acuteness and powers of scrutiny at its command. Transcendental philosophy has the peculiarity that besides indicating the rule, or rather the general condition of rules, which is given in the pure concept of the understanding, it can at the same time indicate a priori the case to which each rule is to be applied. The superiority which it enjoys in this respect over all other didactic sciences, except mathematics, is due to the fact that it treats of concepts which are meant to refer to their objects a priori. Hence, its objective validity cannot be demonstrated a posteriori, because this would not affect these concepts' own peculiar dignity. It must show rather, by means of general but sufficient indicators, the conditions under which objects can be given in harmony with those concepts. Otherwise, the concepts would be without any content, and so would be mere logical forms and not pure concepts of the understanding. Okay, that makes sense. Our transcendental doctrine of the power of judgment, will consist of 2 chapters. The first will treat of the sensible condition under which alone pure concepts of the understanding can be used. Sensible condition under which alone pure concepts of the understanding can be used. That is, the schematism of pure understanding. Okay? The second will treat of the synthetic judgments under which these conditions can be derived a priori from pure concepts of the understanding. Second will treat of the synthetic judgments which under these conditions can be derived a priori from pure concepts of the understanding. Okay. And on which lie a priori at the foundation of all other knowledge. It will treat, therefore, of the principles of the pure understanding. Right, meaning like what synthetic a priori knowledge can we get from the categories? But the first part is going to treat the sensible condition under which alone pure concepts of the understanding can be used. The schematism for pure understanding. That's what we're about to get into in Transcendental Doctrine of the Power of Judgment, or Analytic of Principles. Chapter 1, of the schematism of pure concepts of the understanding. In subsuming an object under a concept, the representation of the former must, subsuming an object under a concept, okay, the representation of the former, the object, must always be homogeneous with the latter, the concept. That is, the concept must contain what is representing in the object to be subsumed under it. Makes sense? For this is the meaning of the expression that an object is contained under a concept. Thus, for instance, the empirical concept of a plate is homogeneous with the pure geometrical concept of a circle, whereby the roundness thought in the first, the plate, can be intuited in the latter, circle. No, I screwed those up. But pure concepts of the understanding are entirely heterogeneous. The pure concepts of the understanding are entirely heterogeneous from empirical intuitions, and indeed from sensible intuitions in general, and can never be met with any intuition. So is this the categories? Are just completely heterogeneous, like they don't overlap or cover anything necessarily? How then can the intuition be subsumed under the concept? Or how can the categories be applied to appearances? For no one is likely to say that a category, for instance causality, could be intuited through the senses and is contained in the appearance. Okay, so how then can the intuition be subsumed under the concept? Or how can the categories be applied to appearances? It's a great question. So meaning, if the categories are like general, how can they actually apply to a specific concept? And if the categories are kind of separate and apart from appearances, how can they be applied to appearances? How does that interact? Okay, I think, is it really this very natural? It is really this very natural and important question which renders a transcendental doctrine of the power of judgment necessary. In order to show how it is possible that pure concepts of the understanding can be applied to appearances at all. In all other sciences in which the concepts through which the object is thought in general are not so heterogeneous or distinct from the concepts which represent the object in concreto, and as it is given, there is no necessity to enter into any discussions as the application of the former to the latter. In our case, there must be some third thing, between the appearance and the application of the categories. I think. Schematism. Which must be homogeneous on the one side with the category, and on the other side with the appearance, and which thus renders the application of the former to the latter possible. This mediating representation must be pure, that is, free from all that is empirical. Because it has to be a priori? Because it has to apply to everything? Is that why it must be pure? And yet be intellectual on the one side and sensible on the other. Intellectual because it applies to the categories, like a priori category shit, and sensible because it applies to appearances. Okay. Or maybe connects them in some weird way. I don't know if applies is the right terminology. Such a representation is the transcendental schema. Oh, that's cool. A cool thing. The concept of the understanding contains pure synthetic unity of the manifold in general. Oh, man. I'm getting, like, better at this, but, like, sometimes it's just like, what the fuck? That's a very basic sentence, and I'm just like, what the fuck is he talking about? Okay. The concept of the understanding contains pure synthetic unity of the manifold in general. Yes. Transcendental deduction stuff. Unity of the manifold. In me. Synthesis. Pure synthesis. Time as the formal condition of the manifold of inner sense, and consequently of the connection of all representations, contains an a priori manifold in pure intuition. A transcendental determination of time is homogeneous with the category, which constitutes its unity, insofar as it is universal and founded on an a priori rule. And on the other hand, it is homogeneous with appearance, insofar as time is contained in every empirical representation of the manifold. Is the baby awake? Oh no. We're doing sleep training. It's not going very well. I feel terrible. Okay. I'm going to reread that because I didn't really get it. A transcendental determination of time is homogeneous with the category. Okay, time applies to the categories, which constitutes unity, insofar as it is universal and founded on an a priori rule. And on the other hand, it is homogeneous with appearance, insofar as time is contained in every empirical representation of the manifold. Hence, the application of the category to appearances becomes possible by means of the transcendental determination of time. The application of the category to appearances becomes possible by the means of the transcendental determination of time, which, as the schema, so it's time, okay, which, as the schema of the concepts of the understanding, mediates the subsumption of the appearances under the category. Gotta read that. As the schema of the concepts of the understanding mediates the subsumption of the appearances under the categories. Time in some way is like mediating appearances, meaning things as they are presented to us in the world. Time is mediating them under the categories. Okay, Kant. Yeah, all right. Here we go. Okay. I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's like some sort of I don't know, phantasm, some sort of glue or something that's holding everything together. It kind of makes sense if it's the form, then it would kind of connect. You know, the form underlying everything would kind of connect in a way our experience with our understanding. That kind of makes sense. It's a weird way to put everything. It's per usual, but okay. After what has been said in the deduction of the categories, we hope that nobody will hesitate, they won't, in answering the question whether these pure concepts of the understanding allow only for an empirical or also of a transcendental use. That is, whether as conditions of possible experience they refer a priori only to appearances, or whether as conditions of the possibility of things in general they may be extended to objects in themselves, without any restriction on our sensibility. For there we saw that concepts are quite impossible and cannot have any meaning unless there be an object given for them, or at least for the elements of which they consist, and that therefore they cannot apply to things in themselves without regard as to whether and how things may be given to us. We likewise saw that the only way in which objects can be given to us is by modification of our sensibility. And lastly, the pure a priori concepts besides the function of the understanding in the category itself, must also a priori contain formal conditions of sensibility. So, okay, we likewise saw that the only way in which objects can be given to us is by modification of our sensibility. And lastly, what pure a priori concepts, besides the function of the understanding in the category itself, must also a priori contain formal conditions of sensibility, particularly of the inner sense, namely conditions which contain the general condition under which alone the category can be applied to any object. Okay. Yeah, okay. We shall call this formal and pure condition of sensibility to which the concept of the understanding is restricted in its use, the schema of the concept. And the procedure of the understanding with these schemata, we shall the schematism of the pure understanding. Okay. The schema in itself is always only a product of the imagination. But the synthesis of the imagination does not aim at a single intuition, but only the unity of the determination of sensibility. The schema ought to be distinguished from the image. Sorry, I had to read that again. The schema in itself is always only a product of the imagination. Okay. That kind of makes sense. It doesn't actually exist, I think, But as the synthesis of the imagination does not aim at a single intuition, but only at the unity in the determination of sensibility, the schema ought to be distinguished from the image. Okay. Yes. And I think what he's getting at is, like, when we have the synthesis, like, it's important not to think of things as an image, but rather as, like, some sort of rule, is what Professor Gijsbers said. Although I don't think he's getting to a place where I understand Kant to be saying that yet. Thus, if I place 5 points one after the other, this is an image of the number 5. If, on the contrary, I think a number in general, whether it be 5 or 100, this thought is rather a representation of the method of representing a multitude, for instance 1,000, in an image in accordance with a certain concept, in an image in accordance with a certain concept of that concept than in the image itself. Indeed, in the case of 1,000, I could hardly take the image and compare it with the concept. This representation of a general procedure of the imagination by which a concept receives its image, I call the schema of this concept. Okay. The fact is that it is schemata, not images of objects, on which our pure sensible concepts are founded. Right. It's rule-based, not image-based. No image of a triangle could ever be adequate to the concept of a triangle in general. It would never attain the generality of the concept which makes it applicable to all triangles. Right. If you picture a triangle, it's got to have certain characteristics. And if it has certain characteristics, it doesn't have other characteristics, and therefore isn't a general representation of that thing. Whereas when we're talking about a triangle and, like, the general concept of a triangle, that's much more broad than, like, that image. Okay. Whether right-angled or acute-angled, etc., but would always be restricted to only one part of the sphere of the concept. The schema of the triangle can exist nowhere but in thought, and is in fact a rule for the synthesis of imagination with respect to pure figures in space. Still less does an object of experience or its image ever cover the empirical concept. Still less does an object of experience ever cover the empirical concept. For this concept always refers directly to the schema of the imagination. this schema being a rule for the determination of our intuition in accordance with a certain general concept. The concept of a dog designates a rule according to which my imagination can generally register the figure of a four-footed animal, without being restricted to any particular figure supplied by experience, or to any possible image which I can present in concreto. This schematism of our understanding with respect to appearances and their mere form is an art in the hidden depths of the human soul, and the art, the true manipulations of which we will be hardly likely ever to guess from nature and to have open before our eyes. We can say no more than the image is a product of the empirical faculty of the productive imagination. The schema of sensible concepts, such as figures in space, is a product and, as it were, a monogram of the pure a priori imagination, through which and according to which images first become possible. The schema of sensible concepts, such as figures in space, is a product and, as it were, a monogram of the pure a priori imagination, through which, according to which, images first become possible. These images, however, must always be connected with the concept. They are never fully congruent with the concept. Hold on, skipped a line. These images, however, must always be connected with the concept only by means of the schema which they designate. In themselves, they are never fully congruent with the concept. The schema of a pure concept of the understanding, on the contrary, is something which can never be brought into any image whatsoever. For it is nothing but the pure synthesis determined by a rule of unity according to concepts in general, a synthesis as expressed by the category. It is a transcendental product of the imagination, a product which contains the determination of inner sense in general, according to conditions of its form, with respect to all representations, insofar as these representations are to be joined a priori in one concept in accordance with the unity of apperception. Oh my god. What a definition. Okay, I'm going to break it down. Let's break it down. The schema of a pure concept of the understanding, on the contrary, is something which can never be brought into any image whatsoever. For it is nothing but the pure synthesis determined by a rule of unity according to concepts in general, a synthesis as expressed by the category which it falls in. I'm editorializing. Okay. It is a transcendental product of the imagination, a product which concerns the determination of inner sense in general, according to conditions of its form, time, with respect to all representations, insofar as these representations are to be joined a priori in one concept, in accordance with the unity of apperception. Okay. Kind of get what he's putting down. It kind of makes sense. Without dwelling any longer on a dry and tedious analysis of all that is required for the transcendental schemata of the pure concepts of the understanding in general, we shall proceed at once to present them according to the order of the categories and in connection with them. At once. Okay. Enough with this boring stuff. The pure images of all magnitudes, quanta, of outer sense is space. Of all magnitudes, space. Okay. That of all objects of the senses in general is time. The pure schema of magnitude, quantitas, however, as a concept of the understanding is number, a representation which comprises the successive addition of one to one, homogeneous, other. Okay? Number. Number, therefore, is nothing but the unity of the synthesis of the manifold of a homogeneous intuition in general, A unity that comes about because I myself produce time in the apprehension of intuition. I feel like that applies to all of them, but okay. The unity of the synthesis of the manifold of a homogeneous intuition in general. A unity that comes about because I myself produce time in the apprehension of the intuition. Reality is, in the pure concept of the understanding, that which corresponds to a sensation in general. Okay. It is that, therefore, the concept of which indicates by itself a being. Concept of which indicates a being in time. While negation is that the concept of which represents a not being in time. Okay. He's going through the categories. Okay, the opposition of the two takes place, therefore, by distinguishing one in the same time as either filled or empty. As time is the only form of intuition, that is, the form of objects as appearances, that which in these objects corresponds to sensation constitutes the transcendental matter of all objects as things in themselves, their thinghood reality. Every sensation, however, has a degree or magnitude by which it can, with respect to the same representation of an object, fill the same time, that is, inner sense, more or less, down to where it vanishes into nothingness. There exists, therefore, a transition from reality to negation, and not just a relation and connection between them, which makes every reality represented as a quantum, and a schema of a reality as the quantity of something insofar as it fills time, in this very continuous and uniform production of the reality of time, whereby we either descend from a sensation which has a certain degree until it vanishes, or ascend from the negation of a sensation to some magnitude of it. Okay, so you can have negative of something, I guess, and positive of something, and you can fluctuate between the two. And that, we're still talking about the schema of magnitude, just number. Seems kind of weird. I don't know how you actually have negative of stuff in reality, but... Okay. I guess you could have less than you started with. Anyway. The schema of substance is the permanence of the real in time, that is, the representation of the real as a substratum of empirical determination in time in general, which therefore remains while everything else changes. So substance is stuff in time, things that persist over time. It is not time that passes, but the existence of what is changeable passes in time. Hence to time, which in itself is unchangeable and permanent, there corresponds in appearance what is unchangeable in existence, that is, substance. And it is only in substance that the succession and the simultaneity of appearances can be determined in terms of time. Okay, the schema of the cause and of the causality of a thing in general is the real which, once it is posited, is always followed by something else. It consists, therefore, in the succession of the manifold, insofar as that succession is subject to a rule. The schema of the cause and the causality of a thing in general is the real which, once it is posited, is always followed by something else. Okay, cause is something followed by something else. It consists, therefore, in the succession of the manifold, insofar as that succession is subject to a rule. The schema of community, reciprocal action, or of the reciprocal causality of substances with respect to their accidents, is the simultaneity, according to a general rule, of the determinations of the one with those of the other. The schema of possibility is the agreement of the synthesis of different representations with the conditions of time in general, as for instance, when opposites cannot exist at the same time in the same thing, but only one after another. It is therefore the determination of the representation of a thing at some time. The schema of actuality is existence in a determinate time. The schema of necessity is the existence of an object at all times. The existence of an object at all times, okay? It is clear, therefore, that the schema of each category contains and leads to the representations of the following. In the case of the schema of magnitude, the production, synthesis of time itself, in the successive apprehension of an object. In the case of the schema of quality, the synthesis of sensation, perception, with the representation of time, or the filling of time. In the case of the schema of relation, the relation of perceptions to one another at all times, that is, according to the rule of the determination of time. Lastly, in the case of the schema of modality and its categories, time itself as the correlate of the determination of an object as to whether and how it belongs to time. Okay, makes sense. They all are subject to time. The schemata, therefore, are nothing but a priori determinations of time, according to rules. And these rules, as applied to all possible objects, refer in the order of the category to the series of time, the content of time, the order of time, and lastly, the sum total of time. Series of time, like things happening consecutively, successively, whatever you want to say. Content of time, like what actually is in time. The order of time, like when something occurs. And the sum total of time, meaning all time, I think, like necessity, an object at all times. Okay. I don't know why this is like a schemata as opposed to just like time exists, but... Or, yeah. These are schemata, I guess I should say, it's plural. We have thus seen that the schematism, of the understanding by means of the transcendental synthesis of imagination amounts to nothing else than the unity of all the manifold of intuition and inner sense, therefore indirectly the unity of apperception, as a function corresponding to inner sense, a receptivity. These schemata of pure concepts of the understanding, therefore, are the true and only conditions under which these concepts can gain a reference to objects. That is, a significance. And thus the categories are in the end no other but a possible empirical use. For as the grounds of an a priori necessary unity, because of the necessary union of all consciousness in one original apperception, they serve only to subject appearances to general rules of synthesis. They serve only to subject appearances to general rules of synthesis, and thus to render them capable of a thoroughgoing connection in one experience. Okay? All our knowledge contained within this whole of all possible experience and transcendental truth, which precedes all empirical truth and renders it possible, consists in a universal reference to that possible experience. But although the schemata of sensibility serve thus to realize the categories, yet it is obvious that they also restrict them, that is, limit them to conditions foreign to the understanding and belonging to the sensibility. Hence the schema is really only the phenomenon of an object, or the sensible concept of an object in agreement with the category. Numerous es quantitas... I'm not going to read it. It's a fucking bunch of Latin, like 3 lines of Latin. I'm not going to read it. If we omit a restricting condition, it would seem that we amplify... well, I should read what the fucking thing says. Okay, footnote 35. All right. Numerus est quantitas finem. Okay, I'm just going to read the English. Number is the quantity of the phenomenon. Sensation, the reality of the phenomenon. Constancy and endurance of things, the substance of phenomenon. Eternity, the necessity of the phenomenon. Okay, cool. I wish I could just put that in English. It had to be in Latin, but okay. If we omit a restricting condition, it would seem that we amplify a formerly limited concept. The categories, in their pure significance, free from all conditions of sensibility, would then be supposed to be valid of things in general, as they are, while their schemata represent these things only as they appear, right? Because it's like through our sensibility and the apperception of the unity that we experience them. And so these categories would be supposed to have a far more extended significance, one that is independent of all schemata. In fact, we must allow to these pure concepts of the understanding, apart from all sensible conditions, a certain significance, though only a logical one, with regard to the mere unity of representations. But these pure concepts are given no object, and therefore no significance that could yield a concept of an object. Thus, substance, for instance, if we omit the sensible determination of permanence, would signify nothing but as something that can be thought as a subject, without being thought as a predicate of something else. Of such a representation we can make nothing, because it does not teach us how that thing is determined, which is thus to be considered as a first subject. The categories without schemata, therefore, are only functions of the understanding necessary for concepts, but do not themselves represent an object. Okay, agreed. This significance is given to them by sensibility. But that doesn't mean the schemata applies, right? It just means that the categories are insufficient without sensibility, which we knew before you started talking about the schemata, so I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm going to read this. The significance is given to them by the sensibility, which realizes the understanding by at the same time restricting it. Okay, I'm a little confused as to why this shit is necessary. Because it felt like we kind of already connected the understanding to the two appearances, or I should say the categories to appearances and experience. So, I don't know. We'll see. I'm sure it'll all come together in chapter 2. Can't wait.